All right. So, like I said, this is just kind of a quick buffer zone because we've been talking over the last week or so, and we're going to continue to talk about a lot of changes that are happening government-wise, whether it be amendments or pieces of legislation, or just different things that are going to change the way of life and change the culture of the United States during the 1920s. And so the big question that we have to ask then is, okay, if we're going to have all of these changes, who's in charge? Who's making those changes? So we're going to go through the leadership of the 1920s. Like I said earlier, very interesting because we get 3 presidents in the same decade. We've only had that 3 times in American history, and all 3 times it's been because of assassination. Fun stuff. So, or assassination or death. So we're going to go through that today, as well as a little side story or a sidestep of a scandal that happens during the 1920s that involves the leadership. That's kind of interesting that not a lot of you know about. Okay, so let's go ahead and just start off with our president that is going to lead us into the 1920s, Warren Harding. This is kind of like it's a different version of like my Forgotten Presidents lecture that we do in U.S. History A. They're all, or some of them are kind of forgotten as well. But so Warren Harding was elected in 1919, took office in 1920. And a big part of his leadership, or a big part of his style, was talking about this, quote, return to normalcy. We've got a nation and multiple nations, multiple allies coming off of this great world war. So Warren Harding's like, we need to run on something, or we need to return to normalcy as a whole, or as the United States grows, so that we can get back on track. We're leaving the war in the past. We need to move forward into our normal lives again. Okay. Warren Harding was generally for less government-like regulation in business, which is going to fare very well in the 1920s as the stock market and kind of the economy starts to boom after the war. Businesses basically run with no regulation, and they're able to produce a ton and make a ton of money. He also believed that businesses should control the government, not vice versa. So how businesses are doing and how they are stimulating the economy should be a factor in a ruling government. He passed a lot of laws. Sounds good. He passed a ton of laws to protect American businesses. So if you remember during the war, we had like the War Industries Board that set regulations on what can be made and when it could be made, et cetera, et cetera. He kind of passed laws that said, you can't do that all the time. Businesses should be kind of like privatized. They should have their own say in what they produce, how much they produce, et cetera, et cetera. He also passed a ton of laws regarding taxes on imports, meaning that if we were going to import a lot of stuff, or if we were going to import from certain countries, that we better get paid for it. The taxes better be high. Unfortunately for Warren Harding, and one of the reasons that we do get 3 presidents during the 1920s is because he died of a heart attack in 1923. Some people say it was just of old age. Some people say his wife poisoned him. I have a different theory, and we'll talk about that in just a second. I know the wife poisoning one is way more thought-provoking, but I have a different theory. Well, it's interesting. It makes more sense than the wife poisoning him, but the wife poisoning him is more juicy. You say nukes? Yeah. Not nukes. Wouldn't that just be a regular bomb? So Warren Harding, he starts off the beginning of the decade, I should say, I almost said century. Beginning of the decade pretty strong. He comes in tough with a lot of, or I shouldn't say not a lot of government regulations, setting standards for businesses, and he's going to really set up the United States for a lot of success in the economy because he sets up businesses to basically do what they want, to make a whole lot of money, to stimulate the economy, to keep our growth going, okay? All right, so like I said, he died of a heart attack in 1923. Like I said, some people said that he was just very stressed from the position. It was, bartered by his old age. Some people say that his wife poisoned him because there was cheating scandals between him and his wife. My thought process, or my idea, is that he did not get poisoned and he did not die of old age. He died from stress from a scandal that happened within his presidency or within his cabinet, based directly on the people that he hired, and they betrayed him. So that's my thought process. This scandal was the most famous scandal in American history, basically up until Watergate in the 1970s. Yeah, right. Until Watergate in the 1970s, or basically until normal times, okay? But it is the most well-known basically up until that point, and that's why we forget it, because a lot of things happen nowadays that you're just like, what even is a scandal, right? But the scandal that I'm referring to, or what I'm referring to that I think killed Warren Harding, was the Teapot Dome Scandal. I know it sounds innocent, it sounds kind of like a ride at Disney World, but the Teapot Dome Scandal was something that rocked the nation in 1923, or basically throughout the late 1922 into 1923. And it all had to do with oil and the growing oil business that was happening on the western coast of the United States. So basically, there are oil reserves, so places where there is a ton of oil sitting underground that we have tapped either as a private business or under government regulation. That's controlled by the Navy, and they happen to reside in Teapot Dome, Wyoming. If you are wondering why it's called Teapot Dome, Wyoming, it's because there is a giant rock in the middle of the town that looks like a teapot. I don't think it looks like a teapot. It doesn't look like a teapot. Like from one angle, one way, it looks like a teapot, but I don't think it generally looks like a teapot. So these naval reserves in Teapot Dome are transferred to the Department of the Interior. So they officially go basically from military use or like military jurisdiction to the Department of the Interior. The Department of the Interior deals with basically like infrastructure things, deals with all things that happen on U.S. coasts or on U.S. soil, okay? The Department of the Interior's director at the time, his name was Albert Fall. Fun fact, his middle name is Bacon. Leased the oil to private companies in return for bribes. So he basically took government property, leased it out to private companies for them to make money, and in return took bribes from them to continue to do it. So basically, Albert Fall, the Department of the Interior, I almost said captain, the director of the Department of the Interior gave money, or took money, I should say, from private companies to basically steal from the federal government. And that is a big no-no. You generally don't want to steal from the federal government. Albert Fall had been newly elected literally within the year of this happening. Warren Harding had made a change in cabinet positions and had added some cabinet positions. So he had directly hired Fall, basically based off of like friendliness. Like, oh, I know this guy from back in the day. I'm going to let him be the Department of the Interior director, and he portrays him. So it makes Harding look really bad because he directly hired Fall basically off of a friendship.
Close hiring.
Yeah. That's what we call favoritism. So Warren Harding looks really bad in this situation. There are newspapers all around the White House for months as the trial goes on, as Albert Fall is basically on trial for stealing from the federal government. And Harding is just kind of in shambles. He doesn't really know what to do. He doesn't know how to respond to these things. Technically, he shouldn't have to. He's not the one who stole from them. But the stress of the whole situation, I think, is what caused him to have a heart attack. Yeah.
Are you sure it wasn't that he gave himself a heart attack on purpose?
So get out of the situation. I don't think so, but that's also a fair question. Drink a lot of Red Bull. Drink a lot of Red Bull, eat a lot of McDonald's. So he is quoted as saying during one of these trials, or during one of the days of trials of Albert Bacon Fall, that he is, quote, not worried about my enemies. It's my friends that keep me awake at night. because Albert Fall had stabbed him in the back. So like I said, we might not think of this as big of a scandal as things that have happened in the past, or in the more recent past, I should say, like Watergate, or any other scandal that may have plagued the recent years, okay? But this at the time was a huge deal. We had never had this type of like corruption within the cabinet and within the Department of the executive branch, right? So it was a huge, huge deal, and the trial lasted days upon days. And eventually, obviously, Albert Fall is, taken into custody. He's arrested for his crimes of bribery. Not the people who were giving him bribes, but just Albert Fall. And then obviously Warren Harding dies of a heart attack. Like I said, I think because he stressed himself out so much about the scandal. Yeah. No, like trial ends on a Tuesday, he dies on a Wednesday. That's what I mean. Like
maybe the wife just really was good at covering up her tracks.
She's like, this is perfect timing. All right, so I have a short video to show you that kind of explains the Teapot Dome scandal a little bit better than I did. Gives you a little bit more information about the realities of the bribes and stuff like that, kind of what was happening at Teapot Dome. If I remember later, like once we're done with the day, remind me to look up what Teapot Dome is, and I can show you that it doesn't look like a teapot, but we'll go ahead and move on from here. So this is from like Australian ABC. I don't know why they chose the Teapot Dome scandal, but it's actually kind of entertaining to, they're just Australian. It's interesting. This was posted, or this was originally created in 2018 when Trump was going through like his firing and hiring spree of all the people in his cabinet. So they're relating it to that, but
some of the stories are already saying this is the most corrupt administration since Warren Harding's in the 1920s. 50 years before Watergate, the biggest political scandal involving an American president was the Teapot Dome affair. And at the time, it was very big news indeed. Republican President Warren Harding was elected in 1920, and one of the first things he did was transfer supervision of land with oil reserves set aside for the US Navy from the Navy itself to the Department of the Interior. That wasn't such a big deal. Interior Secretary Albert Bacon Fall, yes, Bacon was his middle name, granted exclusive rights to the reserves at Teapot Dome, Wyoming, to the Mammoth Oil Company, and similar rights at Elk Hills and Buena Vista Hills in California to the Pan American Petroleum Company. That was a fairly big deal because it was done in secret and without due process. The US Senate launched an investigation. They discovered Secretary Fall's family had mysteriously received $200,000 worth of government bonds. Turns out that came from people linked to Mammoth Oil. The Senate also discovered a $100,000 cash payment to Fall from Pan American, which was officially a loan, but a loan that wasn't repaid because it wasn't really a loan. And that was a very, very big deal. Congress ordered President Harding to scrap the oil leases. The Supreme Court ruled the leases fraudulent and said Harding's transfer of authority from the Navy to Interior was illegal. Under intense pressure, Harding embarked on a 15,000-mile whistle-stop tour to try and regain public support ahead of the 1924 election, including the first ever presidential tour to the territory of Alaska. But then President Harding did something even more surprising. He died at the age of 58. Some said it was the pressure of the Teapot Dome Scandal that caused his heart attack. Others said Harding's wife Florence poisoned him as revenge for his serial philandering. The truth? Well, there wasn't really much. Florence did refuse an autopsy and had her husband quickly embalmed, and he was a philanderer, but that's about it for actual evidence. Meanwhile, Albert Bacon Thorle was sent to jail. So was the head of Mammoth Oil, Harry Sinclair, for contempt, not bribery. And Teapot Dome went down in history as an example of corruption at the highest level of government. Harding was seen as more hapless than complicit, and the new president, Calvin Coolidge, or Silent Cal, won the election the following year.
So silent film joke. Okay. So, like I said, that's just basically a rundown of what we've already talked about when it comes to the Teapot Dome Scandal. Like I said, my theory still stands, and I think I'm right. Track and golf, 2:45. You guys can go ahead and go. Have a fantastic time. I wish you well. Trey, are you also leaving right now? You were on my list for golf. Are you also leaving right now? Okay. All right. So speaking of Warren Harding dying, now we got to have a new president. So next after Warren Harding, who wins the 1924 election, is Calvin Coolidge, or I should say 1923, took office, et cetera, okay? So Calvin Coolidge took office after Warren Harding had passed away. He was his vice president, and he wins the 1924 election as well and continues for just a singular term. Calvin Coolidge is often known as Silent Cal because he was just literally the quietest person on earth. He did not speak. He did not give a lot of speeches. He did not do basically anything. He was very honest. People observed and really liked his quality or his character quality of being very honest and being very quiet and frugal. He was known as a, quote, thrifty president because he reduced the national debt and liked to slash basically spending limits on the national budget. So he was quiet, he was thrifty, and basically just did whatever he could to get the country or keep the country on the booming economy that had been set up for him by Warren Harding. Like I said, he continued to reduce the national debt by cutting spending and trimming the federal budget. He lowered taxes to give incentives to businesses. So he lowered the amount of taxes that businesses and people had to pay on a yearly basis to give incentive to not only spend more and keep the economy stimulated, but for businesses to continue producing more. More is kind of the, what's the word I'm looking for? The thought process here. That won't blow up in our face at all. There's not a whole lot else to Calvin Coolidge. The only fun fact I have about Calvin Coolidge is that one time he threw a dinner party and this lady bet him like $1,000 that she could get him to say 3 words by the end of the night. And he didn't say a single thing the entire night until the very end. She walked up to her and went, "You lose." So that's the only fun fact I have about Calvin Coolidge. No, like the other lady. He went up to the other lady and said, "You lose," which is only 2 words, so she lost. That's the only fun fact I have about Calvin Coolidge. There's not a whole lot to him. Calvin Coolidge being very quiet and honestly not very, like, quote, presidential. It was easy to see why he didn't run for a second term. He basically was like, all right, I did the thing, appreciate it, loved doing the job, I'm gonna peace out. It wasn't that he lost an election, it wasn't that he was unfit for the job, it was just not the right job for him.
So in a way, he was unfit for the job.
it was just like, he's so quiet. He didn't really like rile up the voters. You know what I mean? And it's probably a good thing that he exits at the time he does, because it's about to get real messy, and we would have wanted somebody who's a little bit more solid and stern and directional. He just didn't seem that way. But either way, he just didn't want the job. He was like, all right, being vice president was fun. Thanks for electing me one time. I'm out. See you later. So when Calvin Coolidge decides not to run for the 1928 election, the Republicans had to put up somebody else for the ticket. They basically had to find a new Republican to take his spot, because they, I can't run the guy who doesn't want to run, so I got to find somebody else to do it. And lucky for us, the person that they eventually ended up picking, or the person that they put on the Republican ticket, was somebody who was very well known in the federal system already. We've already talked about him before. And of course, it's the only president from Iowa, Herbert Hoover. Woohoo! Our good old Iowa boy. So Herbert Hoover was very, very different from Calvin Coolidge, and the Republicans kind of ran with that on the ticket. So he runs for the 1928 election. He wins. People really liked him because he was the former director of the FDA, or the Food and Drug Administration. If you remember, during World War I, we talked about how they did meatless Mondays and wheatless Wednesdays, all of that fun stuff. So people really liked him because he was very well known for kind of standing for the cause. Pro-military, pro-America, And then, like I said, of course, he is the only president from Iowa, of course, until all of you lovely people grow up and become president. I believe it. Another thing that he ran on was the fact, or the idea called volunteerism, which is a cooperation between the private sector and the public sector. Meaning that, like, businesses can produce a lot, and businesses can, support the economy or help stimulate the economy, but the public or the people also need to do their part in doing something to continue that economic boost. Unfortunately, our good old Iowa boy, thank you, our good old Iowa boy kind of gets a bad rep because of the Great Depression. So he takes office in 1928. The stock market crashes in 1929. And his last year, 1932, in office is the worst year of the Depression. So he gets given a bad rep. We'll talk more on that later, basically, like if he was actually a bad president or if he was just put in a bad situation, when we talk about, or when we get into our third unit on the actual stock market crash and the Great Depression. But that's kind of where Herbert Hoover's story ends right now, because we're going to pick him up later on. All right. What questions can I answer about the leadership of the 1920s? Basically, the presidents that are taking place and making all of these cool decisions leading up through the 1920s. Why is everything dealing with death? I mean, we just got off a war. There's got to be some kind of death, right? No, just kidding. Yeah, that's right.
Have you ever seen the electoral college map of when of his first election and his second election?
Yeah. Yeah. It just, like, I think we'll look at it. I can't remember if I have it on the slideshow.
For his first election and his second election,
it's like, I can't remember if we look at all of them. There's like this is when they first started taking like exit polling, like how much do you like the president? And I don't remember if I have it in the PowerPoint or not, but we do talk about it a little bit. So Herbert Hoover has a really cool museum in Iowa. Oh God, where is it at? Is it in Burlington? No, that doesn't sound right. Because obviously he was born in Iowa and is from Iowa, so we have a museum that's pretty cool. I believe it's kind of in the northwestern part of the state. I can't remember if it's Independence or for some reason like Pella is shooting out at me, but I know that's not right. West Branch, there it is. Yes. So that's a really cool museum if you ever get a chance to. I used to go all the time when I was younger because my family did a lot of staycations in Iowa. But it's a pretty cool museum. Again, our good old Iowa boy. Okay. All right. That is it for today. That's all I wanted to talk about was a little bit of the leadership of the 1920s. I'm sorry I went over just a little bit. I got carried away with Teapot Dome. Okay. Where do you want me to go back to? Yeah. All right. So the rest of the period, I really want you guys to just focus on getting set up to end the stay on a high note when it comes to the mid-trimester, okay? So obviously, if you have anything missing from me, I'd like that to be first priority, or if you need anything, let me know. Otherwise, if you need to turn in other things for other classes, if you need to ask questions or do whatever you need to, please do so. But we'll just kind of take it easy to end off today, okay?